Gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa. I'm the host of the Ray Tampa podcast. We have in our studio Mr. Russell Cato, a retired educator with more than 40 years of experience working in the Pinellas County schools, and Mr. Jamie Wilson III, a healthcare provider with more than 30 years working as a physical therapist. My co-host, my dynamic co-host. Today we're joined by Mr. Brant Robinson and his lovely wife, Carol Robinson. Brant is a leader and co-founder of the Pinellas County chapter of the group Indivisible North Pinellas. Indivisible led the massive No Kings marches across the nation. Besides, Brant is a longtime educator here in Pinellas County and a congressional candidate in District 13. Brant will help us understand the implications / impact of these two recent developments. The Supreme Court ruling in Louisiana and Florida's redistricting map. Two very big developments. Brant, welcome back to the Ray Tampa podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm so honored and so grateful. And to all the listeners out there, thank you so much for your commitment and your vigilance.
Excellent, excellent.
Glad to have you.
Dr. Pastor G. Greg Murray of Mount Zion Primitive Baptist Church wrote a very powerful commentary on Facebook 2 or 3 days ago. And I'm going to quote him in part in today's opening statement. Quote, "The right to vote is sacred. Many before us marched, suffered, bled, and even died, so every citizen could have equal access to the ballot box. When protections within the Voting Rights Act are stripped away, it sends a painful message to struggling communities that their voices matter less and their participation can be pushed aside. Project 2025 is in full effect." End of quote. Granted, a lot more was said in that commentary, but I'll stop it at that point so that we'll give our friend Brant a chance to give us his explanation
And Carol.
of the Supreme Court's ruling in Louisiana versus CALLAIS.
Well, yes, sir. I mean, to honor your listeners, I want to just put in context, not just my campaign, but other grassroots campaigns like ours across the country. I'm in my 29th year teaching history here in Pinellas. Teaching and running for Congress at the same time is not easy, but I want to assure everybody that, I know as someone who earned my master's degree in African American history, I know right where we are in our country's history, and I assure your listeners that I'm here for it all. We're in our 5th month of this campaign. We take no PAC money. We take no corporate money. We don't do pay to play. Money can't buy votes. We're committed to that. And as you said, Ray, I've come from a tradition of the last 9 years where my wife and I have been part of a community group here in North Pinellas County, where honestly, we did meet once a month for 5 years in each other's living rooms, so no more than 10 people at a meeting, but we never, ever stopped meeting. And then when the madness began here in Florida with groups like Moms for Liberty and our governor accusing teachers like me of indoctrination and grooming and sexualizing my students, we stood up to them. We went to every school board meeting for 3 years. We're why they lost all 3 of their elections in 2024. And as Ray said, we're part of a larger movement that over the past year has led to these massive demonstrations and protests. So there's an undeniable movement taking place. But we also know that what happened this week is incredibly disheartening. You mentioned right first, of course, the governor redistricting the state with his maps. That's in clear violation of the 2010 referendum that the voters supported by 63%, which essentially said you cannot redistrict for political reasons. That's explicit. So we expect that to be challenged in the court. But at the same time, for candidates like me, District 13 now looks dramatically different, right? Gulfport is no longer part of my district. Southern Pasco is. We're a campaign that's, we're running on the campaign contributions of voters like you guys, and it's incredibly challenging and demoralizing when you behave that unfairly. But then, Ray, as you mentioned, on top of it, the Supreme Court ruling that effectively gutted, right, the Voting Rights Act, essentially now, Ray, a state legislature can draw any map it wants to. And that's where we are. In a sense, we're at the beginning of the Jim Crow era all over again.
Yeah.
Jim
Yeah.
Crow.
Yes, sir.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Do either one of you want
Yeah,
to
basically what we were talking about earlier, the politicians can pick the voters they want. You basically, by drawing the lines like that, you can pick the voters that you want.
Yeah.
Essentially.
I want to share for your listeners, guys, if you've never heard of a literacy test or a poll tax, in the late 1880s and 1890s, when a lot of white Americans wanted to take away the rights that African Americans had earned during Reconstruction, they come up with these insidious practices to prevent them from voting. Literacy tests and poll taxes never said, quote, black people, but they knew the intended outcome was to lead majority of African Americans not to vote. This is important because in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, it explicitly said in Section 2 that not only would intentional acts of racial bigotry that result in redistricting maps be illegal, but even unintended consequences. In other words, if you did something where suddenly you knew there was a great imbalance or inequality, that's unconstitutional. Well, the court threw out this language this week. They threw out that language. So in a sense, anyone who's motivated by racial bigotry, and of course the Trump administration has modeled that time and again, anyone who's motivated by racial bigotry can come up with whatever design or district they want to. Now we have to prove that there's racial intent.
Right.
And this is where we are.
And it's obvious because you're going to get, first of all, if this starts to spread like wildfire, disenfranchise of black districts, it'll be disenfranchise of black districts. And as far as black politicians in those areas, you're going to see fewer and fewer of them. So the representation of black people, even in government, will be decreased.
Correct.
If I'm correct, chiming in on what you just said, I think we have about 60 African-American members in Congress. And once they go around the country with this stupidity, that number is going to dwindle down to 20 to 25 members. A lot of the members are going to lose their seat because of this redistricting nonsense.
Big implications.
Russ?
Well, let me say this. If you look at gerrymandering, it is not in the Constitution.
That's right.
Nowhere in the Constitution whatsoever. So I want to clear that out. But here's what we got to understand. Go back to what you said. When that decision was made to cut the 64 Civil Rights Act, this was nothing more than federalizing employees. You understand that? Federalizing employees, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
When the government itself federalized this kind of thing, knowing that it's wrong, that is a hard thing to swallow. Now, let me go back to this. In 2013, there was a case in Alabama. It was called, if I'm not mistaken, Chevy versus Holden.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Holden was the Attorney General under Obama.
Okay.
What this stated was that in this case, that safeguards placed in 1965 will no longer be in effect.
That's right.
You understand this?
Yes, sir. This is
So these people are arguing from the law. They're not just pushing this stuff up.
right.
It's the law that they are here. Now, in this thing of the 64, I mean, see this 2025 decision, you got to understand this is electorally wise.
Right.
You got to understand this. What white people do in government, they do not stop you, but they limit.
Mhm.
You got to understand that. They're not stopping you for voting, but they want to limit your power to vote.
That's right. Right.
You see, that's the difference. In other words, the Constitution stated with the 14, those amendments that people have a right to vote. Yeah, you can vote.
You vote.
But you raise a really critical question for listeners. I mean, guys, do we want our elections to be competitive? If we favor competitive elections, what that will mean is we'll get better candidates. We'll get more people involved.
Mhm.
So the solution we have to all of this is for every single state to create essentially an independent redistricting commission. In other words, do we really want lawmakers drawing these lines? No, because they'll be motivated on their own
Exactly.
interests and motivations, especially if there's racial bigotry
Mhm.
motivated in that too. We should have independent redistricting commissions for every state. People that are appointed, you can have Democrats and Republicans, but they'll be appointed to make sure that they've been selected with their experience and they're independent. They're not beholden to anyone. Now, there are 4 or 5 states that do this, but the day that we have all, what will happen is districts will be competitive. Voter turnout will be higher because people will be more likely to be engaged because they know they have a real say so because the vote's going to be closer.
Right.
So if districts are competitive, that's what we should establish our model. So
Mhm.
I would urge any candidate right now, especially right now, educate voters about this. If you're talking to voters, ask them that question. Don't you like elections to be more competitive? Because that's really what this is all about.
Right. Makes it more,
Yes.
makes it more fair.
In Florida, Governor DeSantis is not new at this.
No.
He is not new at this redistricting nonsense.
Not at all.
He did it before. Because of what he did before, we ended up with Luna,
Correct.
Yeah.
your opponent.
Yes, sir.
And right now, what he's doing is not only offering a boost to poor candidates on the Republican side, he's demolishing the opportunity for Democrats
That's correct.
by changing the lines and favoring Republicans.
Mhm.
I think we have about 28 candidates in the House of Representatives from Florida, 28. But after this redistricting map is implemented, that number goes down to 20.
Yes.
That's a lot.
Let me think now, am I correct
Yeah.
in these numbers?
Some,
Because they're consolidating districts, eliminating seats, like Pastor's seat over in Tampa. Isn't that seat being eliminated?
Yes.
Okay.
The number of representatives from Florida will not change, right? Because we're the 3rd largest state. But we'll
change.
right. But what will change is the composition of the districts. Now they're proposing all of St. Pete essentially will be in the same district with parts of Manatee and Sarasota County. So they're deliberately diluting the constituencies within counties so they can come up with a map that's more convenient for them. And what will happen?
Add at least 8 predominantly white districts.
Yes, they'd add 8 predominantly white districts in Florida. And so as a result, because of the Supreme Court ruling, you couldn't even prove that there was any kind of racial intent because you'd have to actually prove that there was overt, explicit racism. Now, behind the scenes, they're drawing these districts to do just that, right? But what's also going to happen is,
DeSantis said he didn't care.
right, each district, though, is going to become even more purely Republican or more purely Democratic. And as I mentioned, that means less competitive. And if you fast forward that down the line, what does that mean when children grow up in districts where they already know who's going to win an election? They're less likely to turn out to vote. They're less likely to pay attention. And in a way, that's a big reason why we're here today and why we have someone like Trump elected in the first place is because for too long, many of us have not been involved in the political process the way we should.
DeSantis said he didn't care if it was divided up by racial means because the Supreme Court was going to decide shortly that
Right.
didn't matter.
That's right.
The Heritage Foundation, their number one goal was to eliminate the problem of one man, one vote. That's a quote from the goal of the Heritage Foundation. And that was almost 20 years ago. And it is one of the number one goals in the Project 2025.
Yep.
They don't care how they do it.
Yeah.
They want to get rid of one man, one vote.
Yep.
Well said, because the Heritage
Yeah.
Foundation wrote the project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All this is stemming from Project 2025. All of this.
let me say something when Ray was trying to, he was saying it correctly. that if you look at the South, just look at the South, and look at the North, congressional seats that is being held, if I'm not mistaken, 37-94. 94 congressional seats for Republican, 37 for Democrat. See, the idea here, and here's what it is. This midterm election, and Trump knows this, and they know this, Republican, that it is a possibility if this thing keeps on going that the Democrats can control the House. This is see, that's the thing that is all about, right? Controlling the House. They scared of that. They know there's a big chance that if this mid-election takes place, that the Republicans will lose the House. They know that.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
So what they're trying to do by 2028 in the South, they want to redistrict the entire South.
Yep.
The entire South.
Yes.
Not part of it, the entire South. Can you understand that? And what they're saying, they are saying you got to take out racial discrimination because we have there's no racial discrimination here. See, it's all about partisan and racial discrimination. That's what it is.
This was already in their arsenal. This is not new. Right. It was already in there.
So this is not any surprise. This is not a surprise what they trying to do. You know, I always say this, and I want to get off this. Why is it that we are in Iran? It is because of the Epstein files. It is a deflection. And he just get this off of me. See, give him something else to talk about.
Well, I want to come back to the things that might, continue to inspire our voters out there, because I don't want them to lose hope. There's enough of people being disillusioned, disheartened, feeling despair. We've all been through that. What we've seen over the last year is so many people coming out for the first time and getting involved. We want to continue that momentum. And so, Russell, your incredibly important assessment is based on one thing. If the Democrats do retake control of the House, right, in the midterms, we will effectively have neutered Donald Trump for the rest of the presidency.
Yes.
We're going
That's what we want.
we want to make sure that with all these efforts, because again, if anyone out there thinks that Donald Trump is even remotely serious about trying to block the midterms, and I think you are, then you know exactly where we are.
Dead
That means
serious.
we have to do two things. What we can do between now and then is, despite these efforts, A, educate voters at every turn, just like we're doing right now. Educate voters about what's actually happening. And then, of course, we must have voter turnout. If we have the kind of voter turnout that we've been seeing in these elections over the last 6 months, we're no doubt going to not only take the House, we'll likely take the Senate. And if we can do that, we're moving to a place that actually is maybe putting us in a position to actually start working for the things that matter, like actually talking about how to make this country what it must become.
Excellent points, Brent. Yeah, something, Jay?
No, that's pretty much it. I agree with what Russ said, as well as my man here.
There are very significant consequences about what happened this week with DeSantis and the Supreme Court. Very significant consequences. And as far as the Louisiana versus CALLAIS case, I have here some of the direct consequences about this unconstitutional behavior of our Supreme Court. Number one, race-conscious remedies are now constitutional violations. You've already spoken to that. Section 2's enforcement power is severely weakened. The enforcement power, and you spoke to that when you mentioned Shelby County versus Holder. That's what that was about. Chief Justice Roberts' longstanding influence. This case has been on the mind of Chief Justice Roberts since he was an attorney working in Nixon's administration?
Yeah.
When he was just an attorney. He had the concern about the Voting Rights Act. And what they're asking us to do is to reinterpret the Reconstruction Amendments, the 14th and the 15th Amendments. Let's reinterpret, because as we have been interpreting them for all these years, we need to take another look at the interpretation. Justice Kagan had a very strong dissent in this area, where she warned that ignoring real-world racial discrimination entrenches inequality, as minority communities may still vote but lose the ability to elect representatives reflecting their interests. They can vote, but they're not going to choose representatives that they're interested in.
Right. That's what this is all about. That's what this is all about.
Big nationwide, the consequences go far beyond Louisiana, far beyond Louisiana. And it's going to affect the numbers in Congress as they relate to the Black caucus and the Hispanic caucus. They're all going to lose numbers as a result of this. Besides that, they're going to have an effect on some other legislation, such as Title VII and the Fair Housing Act. So this is serious and it's consequential. And what do we do about it?
Well, I would want to remind people of what we've lived through for the last 4 or 5 years. These conservatives, whether it's Justice Roberts or Trump, the vast majority of them, Heritage Foundation, as Carol mentioned, they want to have us believe that we should do nothing that inserts the word race, because just talking about race somehow creates the idea that something is racially, there's racial disparity or racism. But the problem is they also have been demonizing us actually talking about and working to deal with racial injustice. That's why critical race theory, DEI, and woke have been a deliberate effort to take us away from focusing on the real, undeniable inequalities and systemic racism that's been plaguing our country, ironically, since the end of the Civil Rights Movement. And guess what was the end of the Civil Rights Movement? The Voting Rights Act. So the idea that somehow we shouldn't make any laws that even mention race ignores the long history in which race was at the core of keeping Black people from actually voting. So we must continue that, because the Voting Rights Act was a commitment on the part of the United States that says we understand our long history of racial injustice and we're going to have an actual remedy in the law. And now that's gone.
Brant, unless they show up, we have to keep reminding them to show up, show out, stand up against what they want to do, which is basically legalize Jim Crow again. We have to remind them that if they don't stand up against this business, they're going to be considered complicit.
Right.
There's no other way to look at it.
I think what you got to understand, I'm glad that you said that. You got to look at that word magnet, M-A-G-A, make America great again. You really got to understand what that means. You know, this is a white world, people. This is what he is saying. When it comes to minorities, you got a place in America, but you limited. This is what Magnet is trying to tell you.
Yeah.
And the thing that the courts has always had a hard time trying to balance that all people are created equal. They always had a hard time doing that. But now, if you put in Magnet people in the courts, that's what's there. See, look at the book 63. Look at them. These are Trump people.
Right.
These are his people. These are his philosophy. And Samuel Alito, is that his name?
Yes.
Samuel Alito, not Alito. I think he was the one that wrote this thing.
He wrote the majority opinion.
Yeah. And he is saying that racial disparity evidence is too weak to justify.
Yeah, per his eyes, and that's right.
That's
right. Back to Carol's comments earlier about St. Pete being grouped in with Bradenton, Sarasota areas. what has there been any pushback from the mayor or St. Pete's politicians? Have there been any? Because that's my first hearing this, and I don't like it.
There's a legal challenge underway. Because as I said, the 2010 referendum that voters, 63% voted for,
Mm.
it explicitly outlaws political means for redistricting.
Right.
And it's clearly that's what's happened. Even the man within the DeSantis administration who was charged with doing this, that was the expert, he even admitted that
That's
that
how they did it.
Okay.
his motivation was political means. But I think what DeSantis is doing is, number one, he wants a job in the Trump administration.
Oh yeah, he's
Truly, he
kissing up
wants
to
that.
Trump. That's why he's
But
doing
it's
it.
going to trivialize that because
Yeah.
he knows that this legal challenge will drag out. And even if it's overturned, what will he do? He'll appeal it and it'll go up to the Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court that had just ruled to undermine the Voting Rights Act. So in his mind, whatever happens, he's going to get what he wants either way. And for us, it's going to cause a major hardship because Canada's like, wait, now we have to figure out, now I've got a campaign in Southern Pasco County. It's happened in grassroots candidates all over the state. Yeah.
And Russ, basically what you were talking about, how the courts are having a hard time to keep things fair on the playing field, that's because they put people in place to vote their way. That's why I'm saying the Republicans or the MAGAs or whoever, you know.
One of the things I did not like personally, I do not like electoral college. I don't do it. But it's there. And the reason I said that is because here's what that decision did. You took away electoral powers of Black people, electoral powers of minority voters. That's what you did. The only way that voting is effective is through the electoral system. So if you take away our electoral powers, we did. That's what it did. We did. See?
Yes, sir.
Well, Brant, since you are a candidate
Yes, sir.
in a district that is definitely impacted by all of this, and you just mentioned one of the implications to that is that you're going to have to campaign in another county that you didn't have to campaign in before. Is there anything that can happen that would be beneficial to your campaign in any of this?
First of all, even my Republican friends acknowledge that the vast majority of Republicans from the beginning of Trump's second term pledged unconditional loyalty to him. That's not controversial. But they also agree when I ask them, have you heard any Republican leaders across the country talking about childcare, healthcare, veterans? And the answer is undeniably no. The reason why we're so encouraged is because of people like Brian Nathan over in Hillsborough County. Here's a guy who's an electrician, a member of the union, a Democrat. He ran against a woman who was a Trump handpicked candidate, and Trump won that district by 17 points. But this gentleman, Brian Nathan, he won because he went out there and he talked to the people about the things that matter. Our most important hope out there is when we talk to candidates, NPAs, even Republicans, they understand what time it is. They understand that no Republicans talking about the things that matter. Our campaign believes that this is an election that's bigger than District 13. It's bigger than the midterm. We really believe this is an election about fighting to make this country what it must become. Just like James Baldwin reminded us back in 1963. Everything's on the line now. And as we go forward, I know we don't have much time. The other challenge is millions of our fellow citizens have been taught to not trust government. They've been taught not to trust institutions. So we go forward, we also must make sure we bring people together. Our campaign is calling for a monthly town hall meeting, something that Luna has not done a single time in her second term. And I say that because a monthly town hall meeting, even though most people won't be able to come, you know what? We get them a digital printout of what happened or a text printout. Soon over time, they say, hey, I didn't even vote for that guy, but he's here. He cares enough about me. He comes here to dignify me by asking my thoughts and my opinions. So what we have to also do is all these difficult issues that we're talking about, at the same time, we also have to restore people's faith in government itself.
Awesome.
Gentlemen, we all know that this is a decades-long project, but we're in it.
Awesome. This is the one time we need an hour show, not a 30-minute show.
Sure.
So we're at the end, and I'm going to say thank you to Brant and his lovely wife, Carol. I want to thank my two co-hosts for a job well done, as always. I want to thank you, the listening audience, for tuning in to the Ray Tampa podcast, and ask that you continue doing so each and every Tuesday, 5:30 p.m., 99.1 FM, The Bird. Please don't forget, call the supervisor of elections office and request your mail-in ballots. Please, very critical, very important. With all that being said, good evening.